Hey there, and welcome to episode 5 of Flintlock Friday, a show dedicated to you, the viewer, to help you identify these historic rifles and muskets from the Flintlock era, as well as provide you with a concise yet informative overview of the deep history within these guns. I'm your host, Revero 311, and let's get started. Today we'll be taking a look at America's first regulation rifle to come out of a national armory, and that is this Harpers Ferry model of 1803. This short-barreled, sturdy 54 caliber rifle would first see extensive use in the War of 1812 in the hands of soldiers and Marines alike, to include the infamous U.S. Rifle Regiment. It would also go west with numerous expeditions deep into the interior of the continent. And of course, we will look at the potential connection between the model of 1803, Lewis and Clark, and the Corps of Discovery. Alongside all that, it would have an extensive service life on America's frontier, being in service until the 1840s. And on top of all that, it is aesthetically just a beautiful rifle to behold. So let's go over the history of the Harpers Ferry model of 1803 rifle. Before we talk about the model of 1803, we have to talk about the importance of the rifle in the American experience. The rifle was no stranger to the Americans on the frontiers, even leading up to the American Revolutionary War. And when the American Revolutionary War begins, the Second Continental Congress in 1775 actually has a provision out to stand up 10 rifle companies. 6 would come from Pennsylvania, 2 would come from Maryland, and 2 would come from Virginia. These rifle units would fight throughout the entire American Revolutionary War. They would be well renowned for their marksmanship ability, their use of light infantry tactics, as well as their pride and, albeit maybe, their thin skin. At the closure of the American Revolutionary War, the Continental Army is essentially disbanded. As we fast forward to 1791, the newly organized United States Army goes on campaign against the Northwestern Confederacy, and this leads them to the disaster of the Battle of Wabash, or St. Clair's defeat. This is the American military's greatest defeat suffered at the hands of a Native American force. It dwarfs what happened at Little Bighorn some 80 years later. But at the end of that defeat, Henry Knox, who is the Secretary of War, puts out to replace the arms that were lost, and he will go and contract in 1792 with rifle makers in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And while they do have a standard of what they're trying to keep to, as you can imagine, having multiple different gun makers make the rifle, you're going to have a lot of variations when it comes to caliber, barrel length, overall parts, and other things that would go into making a gun. Remember, people do what you inspect, not what you expect. Throughout the 1790s is a big decade for the American arms production, and this is for a couple reasons, because the United States Congress is going to provision out to stand up to up to 4 national armories, but they build 2. First being in Springfield, and the second one being at Harpers Ferry. Americans want to produce our guns in-house over here on this side of the Atlantic, because on the other side of the Atlantic, Europe is in turmoil going through the Revolutionary Wars. So we can't import the amount of guns that we used to, so might as well do it in-house. And when you do it in-house, you can also have government inspectors enforce standards on the guns that are being made. With standardization on his mind, the Secretary of War, Henry Dearborn, reaches out to the Superintendent of Harpers Ferry Armory, Joseph Perkin, and the requirements for the new American regulation rifle would be that he wants the rifle to be shorter than the traditional American long rifle. He wants it to be of a half-stock design and a larger caliber. This is designed in 1803, and it hits production in 1804. And originally, it's for 2,000 rifles. But when Joseph Perkin first sends these guns to the Secretary of War, Henry Dearborn finds these rifles to be excellent, and he doubles the production numbers. The production at Harpers Ferry is pretty slow. Harpers Ferry Armory is hit by a fever, and this fever will actually end up killing the superintendent himself in 1807. But the last of the Type 1 Harpers Ferry rifles are going to be delivered in 1807, and there's about 4,023 of them. Just bear in mind that there is a little bit of variation in the length of the barrel. The barrel should be 33 inches, but you can see that plus or minus according to the sources that I've read. In 1814, the War of 1812 is in full swing, and the United States government needs more rifles. They just need more guns in general. And so they put in for another production run of model of 1803 rifles. And they do, these rifles are a little bit different because they lengthen the barrel to 36 inches. And because of that, they also have to lengthen the stock. And these rifles are made from 1814 until, I've seen two different dates, 1819 and 1820, but they would produce 15,703 of those Type 2 rifles. In total, there would be 19,726 rifles thereabouts made at the Harpers Ferry Armory. And that's another thing, because not all of them are actually rifles. There are a couple contemporary accounts that there's a couple, not a couple, but there were smooth bores made at the Harpers Ferry Armory. So you would have a smooth bore model of 1803 that would give it the ability to shoot different types of cartridges and loads. But that is the end of the production run. And if we think about, we have to remember that by 1820, the American government has also is going to be bringing online the model of 1819 Hall rifle. It has the model of 1817 contract rifle, and it also has this model of 1803. So there's a lot of different variations in rifles that the US government has at the end of the 18 teens. So that is the production run of the model of 1803 rifle. You can see the large influence that the American rifle tradition does have on the model of 1803. Most noticeably is that patch box, and then you have your supported trigger guard, as well as a very curved butt plate. But overall, it's got pin fastened stock, and it's a beautiful gun to behold. So let's talk about the use of the model of 1803 rifle. These rifles would see their first heavy combat use in the War of 1812. They would be carried by the Regiment of Riflemen Soldiers as well as the United States Marines. It's interesting to note that with the Rifle Regiment, when they would do their cross-borders raids into the province of Canada, because Canada was not a country, it was a part of the British Empire at the time, the Rifle Regiment would have taken these rifles. And at the Battle of York, it is said that the Rifle Regiment decimated the British and their native allies when they attacked York, or they raided York. And the British, not the Canadians because they weren't a country, repaid that favor by burning down Washington, D.C. I can make all these jokes because I'm the child of a Canadian refugee, but moving forward, this rifle saw extensive use with the Army as well as with the Marine Corps. And this is the Marine Corps' first regulation rifle, and this does a lot of things for the Marine Corps, because when I was doing my research for the Charlottesville video, I kept on reading about how the Marines in the early 1800s, they wanted any of the English style muskets they could get their hands on because they had more brass fittings, and that was better for being at sea. They did not love the iron barrel bands that I am so in love with. And so the Marine Corps would have gotten some of these models of 1803s, and we know this is because one was captured in 1815 and taken from the USS President. So there is a Marine out there that has lost his rifle. And I find that super interesting because if you haven't picked up, my former MOS was I was a Marine rifleman for 5 years, so it's cool to have the first regulation rifle that the Marine Corps had. After the War of 1812 ended, the Regiment of Riflemen still had these rifles, and we actually have an account from the 1819 of the Rifle Regiment practicing marksmanship, which you do not see a lot of in this time period. Marksmanship is an individual thing that happens that you could probably gain from hunting, but it's not, you didn't have the qualification system that we have today. And it's interesting to read about what their class system, how did they reward good shooters. So the second class marksman would have to hit a circle of 3 inches in diameters at 50 yards 3 times in 6. But if you want to be a first class, you have to hit the same diameter, 3 inches in diameter at 100 yards 3 times in 6, and you can get your first class. So these rifles are obviously good enough to hit a 3-inch target at 100 yards, and it is suspected that these would be the rifles. Rifles like this would also have been what the Rifle Regiment would have had when they're in the upper Mississippi River Valley, when they got the new 100 patent Hall rifles in trials to compare against. So, everything comes back together. These rifles would see extensive use on America's frontiers, and they would be continued to be used at least as frontline weapons, at least until the 1830s. There's accounts that the Regiment of Dragoons, actually, when they didn't get enough of the Hall carbines, they actually were still using these model of 1803 rifles. And by 1847, 498 serviceable model of 1803 rifles were on hand. So that is a pretty respectable service life. If you think that the first one enters in 1804 and they basically finish out the Flintlock era all the way until 1847, they're still on inventory and in serviceable condition. That is a good production run for an American firearm. All right, with that out of the way, let's take on the next topic. And the next topic is by far the most controversial topic I will have covered on my channel so far, minus my making jokes at Canada. That's because Canadians make jokes online about burning down the White House, and it infuriates me because Canada, you were not a country. That was the British that burned down. Let them have that win. Anyways, so the controversy is, what is the connection between the Harpers Ferry model of 1803 rifle, Lewis and Clark, and the Corps of Discovery? Up until the 1990s, it was generally believed that Lewis and Clark took a model of 1803 rifles with them when they went west. In the 1990s, Frank Tate argues that that's not possible because the model of 1803 rifle, while was not even produced at the Armory until the end of 1803. So there's no way they could take a rifle that had not even been made, and it was still going through its developmental stages. Joseph Perkin and Henry Dearborn, the Secretary of War, are exchanging letters, and Henry Dearborn is telling him to fix this, do that. They're still figuring out the regulation of the rifle. All right, simple enough. But this is what we do know. We do know that Captain Meriwether Lewis comes to Harpers Ferry Armory in the spring of 1803. We do know that the Secretary of War, Henry Dearborn, writes to the Superintendent, Joseph Perkin, and he tells him to accommodate Captain Lewis, to give him the gear that he requests and all that information. We do know that Captain Meriwether Lewis hangs out at Harpers Ferry, and he oversees the rifles being modified. Well, you can argue that they are being modified. He's getting locks for the rifles. He's getting flint. He's getting powder. He's getting ball. He's getting all of the logistical needs that he needs before they embark on that expedition. That is what is known. And we do know that Captain Meriwether Lewis is nowhere near Harpers Ferry in the winter of 1803 when the first Type 1 guns are starting their production run. What are the contenders for what Lewis took with him? We do know that Captain Lewis picked up 15 rifles from Harpers Ferry, and that could be any of the three. And this is a beautiful graphic I got from lewisandclark.org. Obviously, photo credits will be included. But these are your options. You have your Harpers Ferry model of 1803 rifle on top. You have your U.S. model of 1792, 1794 contract rifle in the middle. And then we have a modified short U.S. model 1792 to 1794 contract rifle. The lewisandclark.org says historians disagree. I am obviously not going to take a huge position on this. I am just a amateur enthusiast. I love collecting. I'm just going to let you guys know all the information. Sources, as always, will be in the description down below. The argument against the Harpers Ferry model of 1803 rifle is that it doesn't exist. The argument for the U.S. model 1792 to 1794 contract rifles are what was taken was because they have records of 300 of these rifles being at the arsenal or the armory being stored there. And then the argument for the short U.S. model 1792 to 1794 is that when Captain Meriwether Lewis was at Harpers Ferry, he was having the modifications done to shorten the barrel of the contract rifle so it would be much more user-friendly in a canoe. Having that longer contract rifle in the canoe would be a little bit harder, so if you have the shortened rifle, it would be much more preferable. Easy enough, right? The model of 1803 rifle doesn't start being produced until the end of 1803. Henry Dearborn is still figuring out the pieces and what he likes and what he doesn't like about the rifle. And then a pesky rifle serial number 15 appears. And this kind of makes us reevaluate the whole conversation. because the new argument now is that actually Meriwether Lewis is taking with him experimental trials models of the 1803. And the reason he can argue that is because on this model of 1803, it comes down to the thimble right here in which the ramrod goes into. The thimble is not fluted out. It is just a straight thimble. Why does that matter? Well, it matters because in one of Henry Dearborn's letters, before the model of 1803 goes into that Type 1 production, he writes that he wants it to be belled out. And this was unbelled, meaning that that rifle could potentially be one of the 15 rifles that went west with Captain Lewis. This is from the American Society of Arms Collectors, great resource, and I'm pulling heavily from Michael F. Carrick's online article. But yeah, that's basically the argument, is that Lewis actually gets his hands on the experimental 1803s, while at the same time, Secretary of War Henry Dearborn and the Superintendent Joseph Perkin are deciding on how they want to have their regulation rifle be made. Lewis heads west with those experimental rifles, and Henry Dearborn writes to Perkin when he first gets his first trial rifle, and he tells him to flute out that thimble. Also, while they're during the Corps of Discovery, they write that they replaced one of the locks with one of the locks made at Harpers Ferry. And the argument there is that these are rifle locks made at Harpers Ferry, and they're not contract locks, because remember, the rifles that were sitting at Harpers Ferry actually came in from Pennsylvania from that contract period. That is a general overview of the history, and I'll summarize it very quickly. The argument against the model of 1803 being with Lewis and Clark is that that rifle it was still in its developmental phase and had yet to go into production. And so there's no way that Lewis could have taken that rifle west. And the argument against that is, well, actually, Lewis picked with him a experimental rifle that was going through that process, and we know this because serial number 15 shows the rifle without those modifications. And then there's also a third option, and the third option is that Lewis modified contract rifles and shortened the barrel to fit in the canoe, and from that they go forward and they create the model of 1803 regulation rifle. So those are all the arguments. I will let you make a decision. These are really interesting articles. Read the articles, get the books, make your own decision. But that is the end of the discussion on that. Let me know what you think down below. Also, let me know if they've updated this. The article I read online was from 2008. Ethan from 11 Bang Bang was actually the one that pointed me in that direction, because we were talking and I was like, I don't want to make an 1803 video because of this whole Lewis and Clark controversy, but thank you, Ethan, because now I felt more comfortable to discuss it. Yeah, let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know if there's any more information. Let me know if I'm missing anything, because it's kind of a lot of little things that are happening. Regardless if the model of 1803 rifle didn't go west on the Corps of Discovery, there is a good chance it went with Zebulon Pike when he did basically the same thing for the South and the West. Remember, Lewis and Clark, they go northwest to find the Northwest Passage, they're going northwest to get all the way to the Pacific of the Louisiana Purchase. Zebulon Pike, he's going to be doing the same thing, but he's going to be heading to what would be the American Southwest, or that portion of the Louisiana Purchase. And that was in 1806 to 1807, so he could have potentially had these rifles with him. And then we do know the Yellowstone expedition that happens from 1819 to 1820. Members of that expedition are carrying model 1803 rifles. So there's at least that one. And what's also interesting is they're also taking Hall rifles, the patent rifles, and they're also taking the 1817 contract common rifle. So you had 3 different rifle types that were taken west for all the different uses that you could have. So these rifles do make it out west in those early expeditions into the American frontier. A piece of history that I find is so undercovered. I mean, Lewis and Clark got a lot of attention around the bicentennial, but we've already passed the bicentennial for the Yellowstone expedition, and I didn't really see anything about it. But yeah, super interesting history. And then we do know, of course, that these rifles are on the frontiers until the 1840s. That is a general overview of the model of 1803 Harpers Ferry rifle. And next, I want to look at my rifle specifically. So let's go over my model of 1803 lock, stock, and barrel. And we'll be starting with the butt plate. You can see that you have that pretty aggressive groove into the butt plate to stop the rifle from moving when it's in the shoulder of the shooter. We have that classic American patch box. And then the rest of the stock is that it has a not aggressive comb. It's almost a pretty much inline comb. There's no distinctive cow's foot that you'd probably see in other like muskets of the era. We have a cheek rest on the left side. As we move forward, you will see the lock plate and the flintlock mechanism. This one was made in 1819. You can see that the overall size of these rifle locks is much smaller than a military musket lock of the time. Everything is smaller because it's just trying to reduce that weight, and you just have the smaller pieces. Harpers Ferry, 1819, 3 vertical lines. Moving forward, you can see we have the American Eagle emblem. The eagle is facing towards the arrows, which seems to be pretty standard at Harpers Ferry for the time. Underneath, we have our trigger guard, and in that trigger guard, you have that built-in, I guess it would be the shooter's rest, so you can have for your hands to hold the rifle. And on the flip side of that, you have the lock plate is held in by its side plate, 2 screws. You have what looks, I can't really read this, final inspector's mark, and then you have a V in the lock shadow right there. Moving on to the barrel is held in by a single screw in the barrel tang, as well as a single pin that goes through the barrel on the stock over here. The markings on the barrel are, you have a US to show that this belongs to the United States government, and then you have your P proof mark to show that the barrel has been proofed. Moving forward, you can see that the overall length of the barrel, well, the overall length of the barrel is going to be 35.5 inches, and that's going to come back in a little bit. But the octagonal part of the barrel is 12 5/8 inches, and then it goes from an octagon to a circular barrel. Your rear sight post is, or your rear sight aperture is just a simple V. Which is standard for rifles at the time. And then you have your front sight post, which is actually adjustable in the windage. You could move that left or right. And let's talk about the barrel in general, because this is not a rifle, or at least it's not a rifle anymore. This is I measured it out to be around a 0.625 diameter muzzle. So I assume that it's also missing about half an inch off the barrel. It should be 36 inches. This one is 35.5. And if you look at the end of the muzzle, it's actually not completely even. I assume that this was bored out and turned into a fowling piece after the rifle grooves were gone. If anyone has any more information about the smoothbore model of 1803s, I would love to hear about that. But yeah, this rifle finished its life as a fowler, so it shows that continuation of service life. The rifle is stocked in that beautiful American black walnut. It weighs 9 pounds, and yeah, when I was doing some research on this, it was actually kind of interesting to see that the importance of the location of Harpers Ferry Armory and how these rifles turned out, because you can see it pulls a lot from the Kentucky, Virginia, Pennsylvania, American long rifle styles of the time, and that's because of where Harpers Ferry Armory is located, because Harpers Ferry is obviously at this time between Virginia and Maryland. Another interesting thing I found out when doing research on this is that Jacob Hawken of Hawken fame actually worked at Harpers Ferry Armory from 1808 until at least 1818 before he went out to Missouri. And in closing, one of the things that is really unique about these rifles is that these military rifles are only made in one place, and that is Harpers Ferry Armory. There's no contracts out there. These are only made at the National Armory at Harpers Ferry, and that's pretty unique because even the Hall rifle is made at a contract rifle. In conclusion, this has been episode 5 of Flintlock Friday. Moving forward, I'm going to be taking a little bit of a break from making these videos. 1, because I'm running out of flintlocks at a rapid rate, and 2, that these are actually quite time intensive to make, and I want to make sure I'm putting everything into this when I'm making these videos. This might surprise you with how low quality this production is. This actually takes a lot of shots because I cannot speak. I forget how to say words. But anyways, this is the last of that first batch of Flintlock Fridays. I have a question for you. What do you like about these? What do you dislike about these? Do you want to see the rifle first and then the history, or do you want to have the history and then the rifle? Are you more interested in the history? Do you want to have those more close-ups? Certain rifles or certain muskets, or have I just have more information about? The model of 1803 is just, it's complete. There's so much out there, and then the whole connection to Lewis and Clark and that whole controversy just takes you down rabbit holes. So yeah, just let me know what you like, let me know what you dislike, let me know what you'd like to see more of. I am passionate about making these videos, but I want to make sure that I'm getting the right information out to you. As always, if you see something that you think I said wrong, or something I got wrong, or you saw something that I should know about, leave a comment. I have my email also in my about, revere0311 or revere0311 at gmail.com. Shoot me any information. I love interacting with you guys. And yeah, until next time, thank you for making it through this video, and have a good one, and I'll see you in the next Flintlock Friday episode.